Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its mythology and what it's like to fight. And that doesn't just mean its lore in-game, this means its lore and its inspirations, what drew this creature to the realms of D&D. And in this week's case, that means talking about ancient Mesoamerican religion. As we dive into the god of death, of bats, of fire, and all sorts of other grotesque and horrible things, Camazotz. This illustration is actually going to be a hybrid between a commission corner and a Monster Monday, because this illustration actually was commissioned by one of my patrons over on Patreon, Sam Hickson, when they won a commission corner raffle not too long ago, I think early in December of 2021. And Sam really wanted to use this particular character in their campaigns and have their own kind of lore and history and mythology of this character that they're using in their own homebrew campaign. But it turned out to be one of my favourite drawings ever, so I'm really glad that you all wanted to hear about the lore and mythology and origins of this creature as well. And don't worry if you're concerned that you might be about to hear about one single person's homebrew that may not apply to you and may not be available to you, because this creature is very much a real mythological creature, a terrifying demon god, and absolutely has 100% printed stats in D&D that you can pick up alongside many others printed by the Kobold Press Company, a company that I very regularly talk about my adoration of. So with that said, what actually is this thing? Let's get started talking about Camazotz. Camazotz's name gives away lots of information about who and what this creature is. Hailing from ancient Mesoamerican mythology, Cama, in the Quiche language, means death, and Zotz means bat. So very literally, Camazotz is considered the Mesoamerican deity or spirit of death, night, sacrifice, and more grisly topics, taking the form of a massive bat, or in some depictions, a bat-like humanoid. While in modern representations, like in the Smite video game where Camazotz features prominently, this deity manifests as one very powerful being. Early stories from regions that would later become known as Guatemala, Chiapas, Honduras, among others, depict this being as divided into multiple different death bats that can become a relentless swarm, operating as one creature, one hive mind, let's say. In the legendary Popol Vuh, an ancient story whose oldest surviving written account dates back to 1701, ascribed by Francisco Jimenez, a Dominican priest who dedicated much of his life to the conservation of indigenous Maya stories, we meet Hunahpu and Xbalanque, two heroic twins, considered Herculean as a fitting comparison for more familiar Greek and Roman legends, who in their trials are faced with the daunting task of surviving in the dreaded Xbala, the Mayan underworld. In this story, the two heroes undergo numerous horrifying trials and are hunted by a variety of terrible, terrible creatures, among whose number Camazotz proudly counts himself. But Camazotz isn't completely awful. Kind of. Camazotz earns his title as a demon god of sacrifice by offering a pact to the would-be champions that they should promise their armpits and waists to him. Now, while that might seem like a weird offering to us now, these are the areas that are commonly identified as high bleed zones in human sacrifice thereafter, something very ritualistically important to a lot of ancient Mesoamerican cultures. And once these are offered to him, in exchange Camazotz would give them the gift of fire so that they could travel, see, and stay warm in the darkness of the underworld, which sounds like a warlock pact if I've ever heard one. The Mayan underworld, Xbala, literally meaning the place of fright to ancient Mesoamerican tongues, but in our modern comprehension, we refer to as simply the underworld, may sound familiar to some of you, because it's actually a very real place, and would certainly inspire fright in me at least. Xbala resides in Guatemala as a part of the Chiquibol cave system, probably the largest known system in Central America. The Chiquibul cave system consists of 4 different cave groups, each being roughly 200 to 300 meters by 100 meters or so in terms of just sheer cavern space. And each of these cave systems have been extensively but not completely mapped out, with each of the 4 having tunnels which have been charted to between 10 to 40 kilometers so far. Now I really hope that there are other underworlds or afterlives to the ancient Mesoamerican people, because Xibala sounds like a truly awful place. As well as being where we meet Camazotz, the death bat, this place of fright is home to multiple gods or lords of death, including Hunkame, meaning 1 death, and Vakumkame, meaning 7 death. Presumably there are multiple other deaths in between those numbers, or that's just maybe another terrifying tactic to keep you on your toes, like the story that I'm sure we've all heard of people releasing chickens into their school to cause a panic, with a number painted on each of their sides, identifying the chickens as 1, 2, and 4, so that people are continuously checking for number 3, a chicken that has never been there, and in this case, 1 of 6 other non-existent deaths perhaps. But Hunkame and Vakumkame were the rulers of this land, this underworld, this place of fright, with such other cheerful characters as the Flying Scab, the Gathering Blood, the Pus Demon, the Jaundice Demon, the Stabbing Demon, the Bone Staff, and the Skull Staff, to name only a few of the lesser lords of the screaming vastness of the court below the surface of the earth, who are commonly referred to now as demons. We can think of Xibala as something of an Underdark situation, a whole land with various nations ruled over by different demons to some extent. But rather than being a fun but treacherous journey of exploration and adventure, the Mayan underworld was filled with obstacles and sights that would definitely warn any would-be adventurers to turn back and go home. To start with, as you descend into the pitch-black void of the Great Cave System, you would need to traverse 3 different rivers to progress further. The first was a river filled with scorpions. Secondly, a river filled with blood. And if neither of those put you off, there would be a final river filled with pus. Now thoroughly stung by scorpions, covered in coagulating blood and other body fluids, you would then discover what were called the Crossroads of Confusion. 4 roads who all bend and warp their shape to disorient you, but who also are sentient and like to speak to you, trying deliberately to confuse you and to get you lost in the dark. If you manage to unfurl their riddles and their enigmas, and have managed to drag your scorpion and body fluid-laden clothes down the correct path, you would need to make your attendance known to the lords of the underworld, as they've been obviously so hospitable so far that you ought to thank them for their warm reception. However, when you enter the Great Hall, where all of these eye-wateringly terrifying demon lords sit, there are also dozens of, and I made sure to get the right word here because I initially thought statues, but apparently mannequins is the word that we're using. There are dozens of mannequins who look just like these demon lords. If you were to bow to or address a mannequin instead of the authentic demon lord by accident, your insult would cause you to be tortured by being sat on a burning stovetop, and literally adding insult to injury, you would then be mercilessly made fun of for your stupidity. I'm not even making that up. Even the mannequins would move and laugh at you as you are made fun of by towering demon lords. If your pride and your butt were not burned by your visit so far, you then could freely explore what were called the 6 deadly houses of the underworld. Oh yay. The first was the House of Darkness, which, no surprises here, was a calamitous void that no light could illuminate. The second was what was known as the Rattling House, a cavern so blisteringly cold that your bones would audibly shake, and in which you'd be smashed to pieces by bullet-like hail. The third was the Jaguar House, which, unlike the zoo, was just packed to the brim with starving jaguars. The fourth was the Bat House, presumably where we meet Camazotz. And the fifth was the Razor House, less of a house and more of a swirling vortex of razors and other sharp objects that moved at their own free will and sentiently delighted in slicing people to ribbons. The final house was optimistically known as the Hot House, which, if you're expecting a nice cozy sauna, then, well, you've not been paying attention so far. Because this place was filled with molten everything and fires taller than people. So yeah, Xibala. All in all, less of a fun Curse of Strahd module, but definitely still more fun than the Tomb of Horrors. Hello again. Now, no one likes the flow of their video disrupted. I'll be as brief as I possibly can, but if you're enjoying today's content, please make sure to leave it a like, perhaps favourite this video, and if you're really enjoying it and you want to support the channel and help me make the videos that I do, I'd urge you to head over to Patreon. There's a link to that down below in my description box, where starting next month there'll be all sorts of very fascinating rewards, all of which help us to actually make this content. So I'd really appreciate your help. These videos take hours to film and draw and research, edit and upload. So if you think that the effort that's gone into this video is worth your support, worth the price of a cup of tea, then I'd really appreciate that. There we go, done. Nice and harmless. Let's get back to the video, shall we? Which is definitely not harmless. So given where Camazotz likes to actually hang out, we can presume that in 5th edition, through the Tome of Beasts book, this creature is going to have some justifiably horrible stats. And true enough, Camazotz, the demon lord of bats and fire, is considered a challenge rating 22 creature, like many of the demon lords, befitting his title, much like Demogorgon. Now unfortunately, Camazotz is the only one of the demon lords in this book to not have a lair actions, and to have interesting regional effects that we can talk about. But that's okay, because what Camazotz loses in those features, he makes up for in terrifying abilities. As one would expect from a massive bat person, his impressive wingspan allows him to fly 80 feet. What we perhaps might not expect from a furry Batman is that due to natural armor, he has a 19 armor class, and a frankly eye-watering amount of health points. He has 30 strength, making him have a plus 10, 22 dexterity, 25 constitution, a sort of human level of intelligence at 12, 22 wisdom due to his near ageless immortality, and can be charming enough with 25 charisma. He has 120-foot blind sight and 40-foot dark vision, probably due to using echolocation as his main method of detecting what's around him, like most bats, which is also included among his languages, allowing him to use telepathy up to 300 feet to communicate. But he also knows things like Common, Draconic, Dwarvish, Infernal, and more. But we're told that he can't use his blind sight while deafened as a result of an echolocation rule, but he does have keen hearing, meaning that he has advantage on all wisdom perception checks that rely on hearing. He's immune to being charmed, deafened, frightened, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, and stunned, and cannot take damage from fire, poison, or thunder, which I found very interesting, because that would be my go-to move for trying to deafen a giant bat monster. Interestingly, the vulnerability in his furry armor is that he's vulnerable to cold damage, presumably due to being the demon lord of bats and fire. Or maybe he just gets chilly. He's a shapeshifter, allowing him to use his action to polymorph into the form that resembles a giant bat covered in smouldering ashes, or back to his true winged human form, and his statistics are the same in each form, and we're told specifically that any equipment that he's wearing or carrying that isn't transformed either turns into a pile of greasy ash or is destroyed if he himself is killed. He has legendary actions, allowing him to make a wisdom perception check in case people are trying to blind him or deafen him, and he can use 2 of his 3 legendary actions to make a wing attack, much like a dragon, but instead of bludgeoning someone specifically, everyone within 10 feet of this creature needs to make a dexterity saving throw or take 4d6 fire damage, and this then allows Camazotz to fly up to 80 feet wherever he would like. Speaking of which, Camazotz seems to be a really fascinating fusion between 2 ideas in this stat block. He's like if you were to hybridize a Baylor and a master vampire. His fur is filled with blistering embers and is, as we are told, infused with the heat of the heart of volcanoes, so that anyone who strikes Camazotz with a non-reach weapon or an unarmed strike automatically takes 2d6 fire damage without getting to make any kind of save or resistance. He has a specific ability called the Gift of Vampirism, saying that Camazotz may choose to raise those slain through strength loss as vampires. They rise after 1d4 days and are permanently dominated by Camazotz until such time as he sees fit to grant them free will, and may have no more than 10 enslaved vampires at any given time. But vampires aren't the only thing under Camazotz's control. Once per day, he can summon a swarm of various different kinds of bats, either 4d6 giant bats or 2d6 swarms of bats. which appear immediately, unlike most vampires, and their wolf summoning ability, and serve Camazotz for up to an hour. Additionally, Camazotz may summon demons once per day, summoning 2d4 creatures which are known as Balgura, who are native to his cavernous realm, which I presume is a misprint, because either that's 2d4 Baylors, and we're going for either a Mesoamerican reflavouring of that term, the Balgura aren't present in the Tome of Beasts, or, what I think is far more likely, is that right next to Camazotz in the Tome of Beasts are what are called skin bats. Challenge 1/2 creatures who serve Camazotz, and in their own flavour are, quote, repulsive, bat-like creatures from the Stygian darkness. Undead creatures created from the skin flayed from victims of sacrificial rites, given a measure of unlife by a vile ritual involving immersion in abyssal flesh vats and invocations to Camazotz and similar demon lords. That could be them, or we could be dealing with Baylors, in which case this is a truly terrifying creature. Regardless, other abilities that this creature has access to include innate spellcasting, allowing him to cast darkness, detect evil and good, dispel magic, plane shift, shape change, telekinesis and teleport, all at will, create spells like banishment and haste 3 times per day each, and once per day can cast earthquake. Camazotz has a fire breath attack that operates exactly like a dragon's fire breath, only dealing a 30-foot cone of unholy fire that causes 10d10 damage, half of which fire is necrotic and the other half is fire damage. Additionally, in a multi-attack, Camazotz can make 1 bite and 2 claw attacks, the bite of which, again operating much like a dragon's, deals 8d6 plus 10 piercing damage and a further 2d6 fire damage, forcing people to make a constitution saving throw, or the burning venom of this obsidian nightmare monster causes them to have their strength score reduced by 1d4 permanently, like the good old days of D&D. The creature whose strength is reduced to 0 then instantly dies. The 2 claw attacks deal 6d6 plus 10 slashing damage each, and a further 2d6 fire damage, and will also reduce someone's strength score if they fail a constitution saving throw. All of this adds to the idea that Camazotz is truly terrifying, and it doesn't matter what kind of lair he's in, you just don't want to fight him. He can raise vampiric creatures, summon a legion of other monsters, and is someone that you just don't want to be in combat with, unless you have a spear or something like that that can strike him from range. And being a demon lord means that he has resistance to magical attacks. So really, someone with a gun or a very good crossbow is going to be the ideal sort of person to be taking out this creature, but then Camazotz can summon a legion of mighty monsters to be controlling an entire crowd, and indeed an entire cavern system. The Kobold Press books do very much have a love them or hate them attitude surrounding them. And I say that because everyone I know who's read them absolutely adores them, but the creatures are very notoriously hard to fight, so I would presume that players potentially hate them, in a jovial sort of way. And Camazotz fits into this niche really nicely. I feel like when I was reading Camazotz's stat sheet that I automatically got a feel for how an encounter would work with him. I can picture a dark cave system, illuminated with pillars of magma that erupt from the ground, and swarms of bats at his beck and call, occasionally conglomerating and merging together into some sort of horrific demon, all under his command. Him sitting atop some sort of throne of skulls and flesh and blood dripping from the ceiling, casting buffs on his many allies from afar, until enough damage has been done that he sees fit to step down from his throne and engage with you physically, something that no one will enjoy. There's something about a primordial bat god as well, though, that seems to me that it'd be great to not only have a small army of vampires surrounding him at his beck and call, as we know he has a specific rule that allows him to raise the dead under his command, but he seems like a fantastic character to be the origin of vampirism in your games. A demon lord specifically of bats, blood and sacrifice. Perhaps he is where the curse of vampirism began. That's something that I personally intend to use in my own campaign world, from now on at least. Vampirism coming from vampire bats, and Camazotz as a god of sacrifice, of blood no less, having to sacrifice blood in order to survive in the underworld, to survive in darkness, in cold and so on, needing to see with fire or perhaps with magical vision of some kind. He seems like a fitting father of vampires, the original, the patient zero. And if you were doing a vampire hunting campaign, I could see a much, much worse Lord of the Night, father of all vampires, head honcho of the damned and the undead than Camazotz to use in your games. If you've used this stat block or you've included Camazotz in your own homebrew world lore, I would love to hear about it. But for me, that's where I need to end today's video. But I hope you have enjoyed your stay here today with us, and I hope you enjoyed the artwork and the lore. If you did, make sure to leave a little thumbs up down below, like this video, favourite it, and perhaps share it with your community, because we are tiny little imp-like bat demons ourselves and could greatly benefit from your help and support. Think of us as your local little coffee shop, trying desperately to compete with the likes of Starbucks, who have bought every other shop nearby. We need your support to carry on, so if you can, I'd really appreciate that, by letting YouTube know if we've done a good job and by sharing us with the community. In the meantime, however, I hope you don't get bitten by the strength-sapping power of Camazotz, burned by his fur, or terrifying, flaming everything, and don't let yourself become a flesh bat. And until next time, happy monster hunting. Goodbye.